Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar, which, as many of you will know, is the brainchild of the Romanian and the Polish ambassadors to Spain, and I would like to start by thanking them for taking the initiative and indeed for congratulating Foreign Ministers Rau and Aurescu for the excellent work that their respective ambassadors have been doing here in Spain in, of course, very difficult circumstances. I understand, in fact, that both the ambassadors are leaving in the not too distant future, and I assure you that they will be greatly missed. I think it's also right to say that we wouldn't be here this afternoon were it not for the Spanish Foreign Minister, Arancha González Laya. Good afternoon, Minister. It's wonderful to see you. As her colleagues know full well, Minister González Laya has been in Warsaw and in Bucharest in the last couple of months, making what I think really is an unprecedented effort to work more closely with her counterparts in Poland and Romania, both bilaterally and at the European Union level. And I think that it's precisely this effort which has partly led to this realization. Oh dear. Raquel, can you do something about this? Although I love the sound of my own voice, I think enough is enough. Thank you. So as I was saying, we wouldn't be here were it not for Foreign Minister Arancha González Laya, who has been to Bucharest and also very recently making an unprecedented effort to work more closely with both of your countries. And I think it's largely this effort which has led to the realization that our three countries, in fact, share a very common view and have a very common approach towards our neighbourhoods. I wonder, in fact, sometimes whether we should use the term neighbourhood in the singular or neighbourhoods in the plural, and that, I think, in itself may be an indication of how we see this matter. As you know, we will start with the session which the three ministers will give us their insights into this matter, and then in about half an hour's time I will be calling on my think tank colleagues from here in Madrid, but also of course Poland, Warsaw and Romania to discuss more specific aspects of this matter. So without further ado, Minister González Laya, the microphone is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles, and it's great to see my good friends on the screen. It's only a short time ago that we were meeting physically. This seminar is the result of a desire on the side of Romania, Poland and Spain to explore new ways of collaboration. We are countries that work very well in the European Union. We know each other well. We like each other. We find we have many things in common, but we have come to the conclusion that it's important that we articulate maybe our views and that we work together in areas where sometimes we may not be expected by other European colleagues or other members outside the European family. Through this, showing very clearly our commitment to building consensus within the European Union. So the three of us thought that we have in common that we are peripheral in the geographic sense in the European Union. Spain is in the southern western part of the European Union. Poland and Romania are on the eastern part, northern central eastern part of the European Union. We share that we are geographically peripheral. We share that we are important countries in the European Union. We have a weight both economically and politically, and we share also a commitment to values and principles, including a shared membership in a security organization like NATO. And it's on this that we wanted to build something specific to the topic that brings us to this conversation, which is our neighborhood. Whether we use the singular or the plural, at the end of the day, is about building more stability, closer ties with our neighbors. Now, our neighbors are different in that part of our neighborhood, especially the neighborhood on the east, has partly a vocation to be members of the European Union, and this is where with the three of us, and I think I can be cheeky enough to speak for my two colleagues also, share the importance of progressing in the accession process of the countries in the Balkans, with whom we have already opened a European perspective, and for whom and with whom we would like to start this journey as soon as possible. There are other neighbors that may not necessarily have, at least today, a perspective to become members of the European Union, but we want stability, we want security, we want safety in our borders. Our starting point is that today's relationship with our neighbors has to be one of interdependence, starting from the realization that we are interdependent. We are not dependent and we are not independent. We are interdependent. And I want to stress this because it's only through this concept of us being interdependent with our neighbors that we can build a relationship with them from the point of view of co-responsibility, whether this co-responsibility is on managing issues like fighting against climate change, whether it's about and therefore decarbonizing our economies, whether it's about protecting our biodiversity, something very important in the southern neighborhood because we share also a sea around which we want to build protection of biodiversity, whether it is to manage together migratory flows, migration, which is an important topic both in the Eastern Partnership as it is on the Southern Partnership, whether it's about women's empowerment, youth employment, all of this, or whether it's about fighting the pandemic, if we want to bring this to something a bit more topical. This conversation from where we sit here in Spain starts with the notion of interdependence. It requires that we work from a co-responsibility, and it is important that we build this relationship from a strategic point of view, not just an opportunistic relationship where we deal with ad hoc issues when they come. We want to do this also from a more strategic point of view, understanding that this would be important and good for us in the EU, and whether we are located in the south or in the east, in the north or in the south, it's important to all of us, and it's also important for our neighbors. Let me end with before I end, another concept that I like to introduce in the conversation is the notion of ownership. This is, which is very much linked to the principle of co-responsibility. Ownership in that we understand that this only works if everyone feels that everyone has a stake in this conversation. Finally, there is something very important in this conversation, whether it's on the east or whether it's on the south, it's security. In the north, it has a different dimension. We are seeing this today being played out in the discussions we are having in and around Ukraine and its territorial integrity. It's also the case in the south. If we look at issues like the fight against terrorism or instability in the Sahel, security is a very important dimension in the discussions we will have with our neighbors, which reinforces the need to build this partnership as an as a whole of the EU with a whole of our neighbors working hand in hand. So Charles, by means of a short introduction, just to kick off this conversation, and again, thanking very much my colleagues for joining in this conversation, and obviously appreciating the work that all the think tanks have put into this conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Minister. I like the idea that we are all peripheral here, but also at the same time very much at the heart of Europe. And of course, you're absolutely right about interdependence and how we must do more to work together on when it comes to facing up to these shared policy areas such as decarbonization, migration, employment, and indeed security, which is an overarching concern. So thank you very much for those introductory thoughts. Let me now hand the microphone over to Bogdan Aurescu, the Foreign Minister of Romania. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon, Minister. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Director. It's a great pleasure for me to attend this event together with two very close colleagues and friends of mine, dear Arancha and dear Zbigniew. It's very good to see you. And it is not by accident that we are, the three of us, together today, because indeed, well, Romania has strong strategic partnership with both Poland and Spain, and we are very like-minded in many areas, and we do care about the EU neighborhood, the three of us. And I think having this debate on the neighborhood in the current post-pandemic context, it's a very timely discussion, because we are very much focused on what we are doing inside the EU. We are preparing for the national recovery plans, but at the same time, we need to take a good and very careful look at what happens around us. Back in 2016, when we adopted the European Union's global strategy, we did it because we needed a stronger Europe, better equipped to go through times of crisis and become more resilient and efficient. 5 years passed since the adoption of this strategic framework, and it has been anything but business as usual. However, looking back, I can say that the focus of the global strategy on resilience and the integrated approach to conflicts and crises remain highly relevant for framing and supporting the EU action in the neighborhood. In the current world, which is more complex and dynamic than ever, and especially more unpredictable than ever, EU's global role and footprint must be strengthened. It is our firm belief that EU surrounding areas, both East and South, and the challenges stemming from therein are natural places where a more prominent global role for the Union should be pursued. One way to do this is working for the resilience of states and societies. You will notice that the term resilience will come back a lot in my intervention. Based on an integrated approach to conflicts and crises towards both the Eastern and the Southern neighboring and surrounding regions. Complementary to this, it is essential that the EU projects security and values in its neighborhood. And I very much agree with what Arancha just said about the security dimension that we must inject in our approach towards our neighborhoods. And the key question here is, if EU is not influential in its neighborhood, how can it be a global actor? The COVID pandemic confronted the world with an unprecedented crisis. We also need to take into account the impact on human rights and fundamental freedoms, on democracy, on the deepening of pre-existing inequalities, on the economic downturn, on the dropping in international exchanges, on the increased intolerance and extremist behavior and the enhanced vulnerabilities. All this demonstrated once again the importance of common action, of solidarity and cooperation, as well as the efficient multilateralism, respect for the rule of law and international law. And as we prepare for the Eastern Partnership Summit later on this year, we found ourselves at a decisive juncture. At the same time, we need to start implementing the new agenda for the Mediterranean and to ensure a smooth start of the new financial instrument, the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. Hopefully, the new frameworks will be better adapted to the present and future challenges. We have conflicts, either protracted or active. We have socio-economic gaps. We have climate change, irregular migration, terrorism, and radicalization, as well as, we shouldn't exclude that, possible future pandemics. Most of the challenges we are facing today are similar in nature in the East and South. Of course, there are different realities and regional specificities, and that's why our approach must be balanced in political, economic, and financial terms, and must be calibrated on the specific level of ambition and aspirations of our partners, as well as, of course, to their performance. Mentioning the South, I briefly want to touch upon a few points. Dear Arancha, we have discussed this when you have been in Bucharest in February. A solid EU engagement in the southern region should address security challenges and find solutions to ongoing conflicts, including in the Sahel, given the interconnections between the two regions. We are in favor of a regular political dialogue with our southern partners, and we support negotiations for a new set of partnership priorities, accompanied by relevant benchmarks. We should also emphasize youth empowerment, and of course, we should use education, we should use training, gender equality, opportunities for women and girls, promotion of entrepreneurship, quality job creation, inclusive digitalization. This is key in dealing with the root causes of the irregular migration, for instance. But since Arancha already has touched some of these matters, I will not go further. Coming back to the Western Balkans, these developments in the region are the proof that the European idea inspires and triggers democratic transformation. In challenging times, the EU has managed to uphold its commitment to the region. We have given strong political signals, such as the March 2020 decision on the opening of accession negotiations with Albania and the Republic of North Macedonia, or the EU Western Balkan Summit later in May the same year. These have contributed decisively to upholding the pro-European orientation of the region. The very answer to any geostrategic dilemma that our partners in the Western Balkans might encounter lies in a credible enlargement policy of the European Union, able to anchor this region irreversibly on the European path. To this aim, enhancing mutual trust, delivering on commitments both for the leaders of the region but also for the EU remain key. The lessons learned in the Western Balkans with regard to maintaining and strengthening the pro-European orientation of the region should be put to good use also in the Eastern neighborhood. Building on the idea of shared ownership and responsibility, I would like to briefly refer to two aspects that are key for the future success of the Eastern Partnership. First, it is essential that partners continue to deliver in the reform process, particularly in upholding the rule of law, fighting corruption, as well as making best use of the opportunities that EU support has to offer. The more and more and differentiation principles offer excellent incentives in unlocking new opportunities. In the end, the potential of the Eastern Partnership partners' relation with the EU is really what the partners make of it. Secondly, from our own EU perspective, it is also important to respond to partners' needs, interests, ambitions. This region needs an ever-growing EU commitment by stronger engagement through targeted and consistent assistance for reforms, and also through adequate funding. It also needs enhanced access to the EU market. And this is valid in particular for Georgia, the Republic of Moldova, and Ukraine, based, of course, on the commitments which are set forth in the association agreements. The political decision on considering the European integration perspective for the ambitious or the most ambitious partner countries should not necessarily be treated as a taboo and be deferred for later discussion when conditions would be ripe, because this is obvious. Such a commitment could only contribute to strengthening the process of democratic transformation in the region. And I take this opportunity, dear Zbigniew, to recall the recent trilateral meeting between Romania, Poland, and Turkey that I hosted last week in Bucharest, and to which I had the honor to have you as a guest. And we invited Ukraine and Georgia to join us and to participate for the first time in this meeting, due to the need to enhance our dialogue and cooperation with regard to the issues related to the security in the Black Sea region. Of course, having also in mind the recent military build-up that we witnessed in and around Ukraine. During our meeting in Bucharest, we have had a very comprehensive exchange of views, and we have sent a strong message that we are all strong supporters of both Georgia and Ukraine's European and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, as well as of their sovereignty and territorial integrity. Now, the EAP region is facing the most difficult times since its inception. As a direct neighbor to the Eastern Partnership countries, Romania is closely watching the many concurrent challenges affecting the region. Destabilizing influence of third actors, impact of the COVID pandemic, protracted and active conflicts, domestic political crisis. Moreover, the constant postponement of the Eastern Partnership Summit has brought further uncertainty regarding the EU engagement with the partner countries. That's why we aim at holding the long overdue Eastern Partnership Summit in a physical format and adopting a forward-looking declaration of the summit. Partners would also need to showcase commitment and a constructive approach in making the summit a success. Against this challenging background, the EU cannot afford to step back from its strategic commitment to the Eastern partners. On the contrary, when the region is facing such adversity, the EU should do more and not less in order to engage with the partners and support the democratic transformation in the region. So we need to act decisively to send a strong political signal to our Eastern neighborhood. The most effective way is to, quickly agree on a strategic long-term vision for the Eastern Partnership, accompanied by ambitious, forward-looking, concrete deliverables to be endorsed by the forthcoming Eastern Partnership Summit. The Eastern Partnership strategy for the post-2020 era should aim to strengthen our partners' resilience and address all relevant dimensions: political, sectorial, security, funding, strategic communication. And speaking of security, what the EEP needs in particular is a systematic approach of this dimension. The EU and Eastern partners share a common interest in addressing various hybrid threats, such as disinformation, trolling, cyber attacks, corruption, to name just a few. We have to engage in a closer cooperation with practical and concrete tools in order to tackle these critical issues and strengthen our partners' resilience. In the same vein, we could also better connect our Eastern partners to all CSDP-related developments, both through a deeper political dialogue and practical involvement, of course, when and where appropriate. The Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center to be established in Bucharest could make a valuable contribution in this regard. We should also not forget that, as the global strategy puts it, I quote, internal and external security are ever more intertwined. Our security at home entails a parallel interest in peace in our neighborhood and surrounding regions. It is therefore in the EU's own interest, which is a strategic interest, to take more responsibility in dealing with the topic of the protracted conflicts in the Eastern neighborhood. And I would remind you that in November, together with counterparts from 10 member states, and Poland was among those like-minded member states, and I thank once again Zbigniew for joining this demarche. We have signed a letter addressed to the High Representative Borrell in view of advancing in the near future a substantial dialogue among EU foreign ministers on enhancing the EU's active approach towards protracted conflicts, and I'm happy that we will have a chance to address this topic during our Gimnich meeting at the end of May in Portugal. What we need is to develop concrete instruments through which the EU can have leverage on facilitating solutions with regard to protracted conflicts, of course, based on international law. We need renewed attention on this topic and to re-acknowledge the importance of maintaining an alert role of the EU on this dossier in light of the strategic objective of consolidating the global vocation of the Union. As we can see, we are faced with many serious and overlapping challenges across our neighborhoods, but nevertheless, therein lie tremendous opportunities for the EU to strengthen its role on the global stage by projecting resilience, once again, it's the last time I promise, in its vicinity and supporting the democratic processes in these regions. I am fully confident that together as a union we will rise to this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your input, and in particular for reminding us of the importance of enlargement. We are here today not only to talk about our relations with our 10 southern neighbours and our 6 eastern neighbours, but also, of course, about our relationship with candidate countries. And I think it's very appropriate that you should have underscored the fact that ultimately the promise of enlargement or the promise of accession is certainly one of the most powerful and transformative policy tools that the EU has available to it. Let me hand over now to the Foreign Minister of Poland. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. Zbigniew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Director Powell. Hello, Arancha. Hello, Bogdan. It's great to see both of you again, and it's really great to get engaged in our common discussion, considering the, I would say, our one EU neighborhood, but still divided into at least three segments. I believe that the European Union must be active across the entire area around it, but given the division of labor at this webinar, I will focus on the East, and I must say that many things that I'm going to tell you in these introductory remarks stem from my very interesting discussion with you, Arancha, when you were kind enough to pay a visit to Warsaw. We discussed the problems of the southern and eastern neighborhood, and we found in a most natural way so many similarities. And Bogdan, once more, thank you for the meeting in Bucharest last week. And we had a very complex discussion, three of us, the ministers of Romania, Turkey, and Poland, and it was such a refreshing, intellectually refreshing experience that I cannot help but to use so many of these findings in my today's presentation. So, as I said, I will focus on the East above all. First, we shall keep in mind that our partners in the East, unlike in other neighboring areas, face an additional challenge: an external power that seeks to rebuild its grip on the region. Russia constantly destabilizes Eastern Europe and supports authoritarian practices. Second, at the same time, a number of societies of Eastern Europe show they want to live in stable, prosperous, and democratic environments. The Belarusians, Ukrainians, Moldovans, Georgians, and others often look up to the EU and expect concrete cooperation. Third, we are satisfied with the success of the Eastern Partnership policy. Association agreements, including deep and comprehensive free trade areas, are a big achievement. I shall also add visa liberalization schemes and tailored approach to those less ambitious partners. Ladies and gentlemen, the Eastern Partnership has always served the people through the promotion of democracy and stability. It is why other actors' behavior must not limit our ambitions, and we need to push strongly for further development of the initiative. The upcoming 2021 summit of the partnership offers an opportunity to give a new impetus and set the initiative's agenda for the years to come. It should take place in a physical form. The summit declaration is crucial. It should be ambitious, contain a political vision, and confirm the European choices of partners who intend to deepen their ties with the Union. We also need to present new Eastern Partnership deliverables. They shall bring tangible results for citizens and encompass Eastern partners' gradual access to the single market, strengthening their human capital, developing people-to-people contacts and programs for the youth. The promotion of good governance and fight against corruption should remain, as Bogdan underlined so many times today, our priorities. We should support strongly all efforts, such as those led by President Maya Sandu in Moldova, to eradicate corruption, which is often a smokescreen for the Russians to build up their influence in Eastern Partnership countries. We shall also aim at reinforcing the resilience of social, political, and economic structures of the Eastern Partnership countries against external pressure. As we watch the developments in Belarus, we certainly need to reflect upon the inclusiveness of the Eastern Partnership. Poland wants to ensure the participation of all 6 countries in the 2021 summit, although with Belarus at a lower level. It should not be the EU's decision to exclude Belarus from the partnership. Minsk has decided by itself to limit the participation in the initiative. Still, as I said before, the Eastern Partnership has a strong societal component. The EU recalibrated its assistance to Belarus following fraudulent election. The cooperation is now focusing on civil society, youth, medium and small businesses, and local governance. In the future, when the authorities in Minsk make it a real option, the Eastern Partnership could serve as a platform for assisting Belarus in its transformation path. The time is ripe to publish the EU economic plan for a democratic Belarus. This would send a positive, strategic message to the Belarusian society. Ladies and gentlemen, Poland is deeply concerned by the Russian military build-up around Ukraine borders and in occupied Crimea. I went to Kiev 2 weeks ago to pass the message of solidarity and strong support for Ukraine's sovereignty. I encourage both of you, Arancha and Bogdan, to consider similar steps. Let us be clear. Russian actions threaten the security of the whole of Europe. We need firm EU reaction to support of Ukraine. The EU has to intensify its strategic communication towards both Kiev and Moscow. Ukraine must feel that we have its back, while Russia must be aware that the EU will respond in case of further escalation. We should discuss the EU actions to increase Ukraine's resilience and at the same time discourage Russia from aggressive behavior. One of the tools the EU has at its disposal are sanctions. We also need to cooperate more closely with NATO and the US. Joe Biden's administration acted resolutely in countering Moscow's aggressive actions, as prove latest US sanctions on Russia. EU support for Ukraine and actions aimed at containing the Russian policy of subduing its neighbors is critical for the credibility of the EU neighborhood policy. Otherwise, our policy boils down to kind of targeted development assistance. I do hope we all agree this is way below our expectations considering the EU foreign policy. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Polish perspective, the EU has 2 long-term strategic interests in its Russian policy: to promote democracy and human rights so that Russia can be a predictable country adhering to internationally accepted values and norms of conduct. High-level political contact between the EU and Russia should only take place once there is significant progress in key issues, such as the implementation of the Minsk agreements, respect for sovereignty of the neighbors, and halt to state terrorism. Meanwhile, amassing of troops on Ukraine's border and the news on Russian involvement in the 2014 explosion in Czechia makes us very, in fact, extremely pessimistic about prospects for a positive change in the EU-Russia relations. Similarly, we see no signs for optimism in the Russian domestic area. The crackdown on civil society linked to the September elections is ongoing. We continue to call for actions regarding Mr. Navalny. We must not shy away from supporting Russian activists. Human rights and civil society should play a fundamental role in the EU's dialogue with Russia. Our policy towards Russia has to be principled and seek more coordination with the UK and transatlantic partners. Last but not least, the EU must be firmly united on Russia. Moscow will exploit any inconsistency in our position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you in particular for being so explicit about your views on Ukraine and Belarus in particular. I think the credibility of the EU is very much at stake with regard to these two countries, and it's not just, in fact, the credibility of the Eastern Partnership, it's the credibility of the European Union as a global actor that is ultimately at stake. Sadly, we have run over the time that we had allotted for this session. So let me just thank the three of you, muchas gracias, Arancha, for your very interesting contributions. And I'm now going to invite the other three speakers to join me. And of course, the ministers can stay with us if they are able to. That would be very much to the benefit of this session. So let me call on our next three speakers. The first speaker is Itxaso Domínguez, who is the Middle East and Maghreb coordinator at the Fundación Alternativas here in Madrid. I can't actually see Itxaso, but I know that she is here. There she is, lovely. Good afternoon, Itxaso. Lovely to see you again. We also have with us my dear friend and colleague Sławomir Dębski, who is director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs, PISM, which we have always regarded as our natural Polish counterpart, and we've done a lot of work with PISM over the years, and I'm very, very pleased, Sławomir, to have you with us this afternoon. And last but by no means least, we have my dear friend Gheorghe Magheru from the New Strategy Center in Bucharest. Elcano and the New Strategy Center have recently established a very fruitful working relationship. So it's a pleasure, Gheorghe, to be with you this afternoon, and I'm very pleased that we have established this link so recently, which I think is being very fruitful. So without further ado, as you know, the purpose of this session is for you to give us your views on the EU's neighbourhood policy. I'm assuming that Itxaso will concentrate on the southern neighbourhood, and of course I would encourage you to be as critical as you like. I think that we all agree that the ENP was a wonderful thing when it was first designed and first launched in 2004. I think we probably all agree that it was looking rather tired by the time it was revised in 2015. And those of us who've taken an interest in the southern neighbourhood, I think many of us at least have probably also been quite critical of the Union for the Mediterranean, which was established in 2008, with a view to continuing the spirit, if not the substance, of the Barcelona process. So without further ado, Itxaso, the floor is yours. Thank you very much again for joining us.
Thanks so much. It's such an honor to be with you all, and it was a pleasure to also listening to the ministers before. I hope I'm up to the level of being as critical as I should and engage in a very fruitful conversation. So as we all know, in 1995, the Barcelona Declaration launched the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership with the aim to create an area of peace, shared prosperity, and cultural and human exchanges. 26 years later, or almost 26 years later, the Mediterranean region faces a number of classic challenges in governance and democracy, socio-political and socio-economic affairs, and security. All of them are aggravated by the pandemic. Inequalities in all shapes and dimensions have sorely deepened, both within the countries and between the countries in the southern neighbourhood, as well as regarding the fractures between the south and the north of the Mediterranean. Add to that the relatively new risks, such as climate change and the effects of the fourth industrial revolution. In 2011, anti-authoritarian revolts under the so-called Arab Spring took the policy world by surprise. Chiefly among them the European Union, and myself, I have to recognize that, which has to open its eyes to the real and dire situation in the southern neighbourhood, after years of implementing the same detrimental policies and investing a tremendous amount of money and effort. However, the momentum and willingness for transformation were short-lived, and the neighbourhood went back to being perceived as a constant source of threats from a ring of friends, if that was ever the case, and we can speak about that afterwards, to a ring of fire. The global strategy principle pragmatism was to mean the European Union and its member states were contented with justifying their policies by constructing false dilemmas. The most dangerous amongst them, the one that equates the need for stability and security, which we all agree are overarching interests, with not antagonizing undemocratic regimes, translated into a push for good governance instead of progress towards efficient, democratic, and fair systems of government. That formula has proven not sustainable, for the situation in each and every country has worsened, and improvement in the well-being of these societies is nowhere to be seen. Conflict and violence have not disappeared, and the people in the region keep courageously taking to the streets demanding changes their leaders are neither willing, maybe nor able to implement. EU leaders and officials seemed aware of the insufficiencies of their approach. The 25th anniversary of the Barcelona process looked like the perfect scenery for announcing a daring blueprint, and Spain played a key role in that regard. The new agenda for the Mediterranean has been released. It will guide EU policy towards the region at regional and bilateral levels. It is a considerably comprehensive text that broadens the previous agenda by emphasizing 5 areas of action, supposedly without hierarchy. All of them are commendable. First, revitalizing the commitment to democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and responsible governance. The previous panel stressed values are an essential component of our foreign policies. Also, providing support to countries to meet security challenges and find solutions to ongoing conflicts. Thirdly, tackling together the challenges of forced displacement. In the realm of the digital transition, supporting resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and connected economies that create opportunities for all, especially women and the youth. And in line with the Commission's prioritization of the European Green Deal, harnessing the potential of a low-carbon future, protecting the region's natural resources and generating green growth. However, regrettably, there is indeed a hierarchy and not an equally commendable one. This stratification is evidenced by the accompanying staff working document and its preliminary flagship initiatives. I believe dissecting these documents helps us understand and assess, even if only in part and briefly, I hope, the reality and consequences of EU policies on the ground. It aspires at building prosperity and increasing trade and investment to support competitiveness. However, this framework shows again an amplified emphasis on the benefits of free trade, mainly through free trade agreements, whereas it still has not been proven that neoliberal recipes are the best suited solutions for Mediterranean countries. Those countries have actually lost their competitive advantage. Furthermore, the elite benefit from a pernicious model of the so-called crony capitalism that stimulates an unequal distribution of wealth. I am thinking also, for example, of the impact European companies have at all levels on those societies. We know some of them even evade their corporate social responsibilities. We must then ask ourselves whether that is compatible with genuine inclusive growth. The language of inclusiveness is one of the most great innovations of the new agenda, and it has great potential, don't get me wrong, but it shouldn't stay as just another buzzword. Migration is an area of maximum concern for the text at hand, reflecting the EU's current apprehensions. This is one area in which the EU seems willing to actually use conditionality. Financial support will be at least partly conditional on cooperation in this field. But what does cooperation mean? Take, for instance, the expressed intentions to enhance operational cooperation on maritime security and with coast guards against the backdrop of continued and quite probably, frankly, violations of human rights along the Mediterranean coast. Dozens of experts on the topic have warned about the inadequacies of the new Pact of Migration and Asylum. And here we are replicating and strengthening them anew. Instead of prioritizing the fight against irregular migration, putting the burden on the countries of origin and constantly demonizing the very human concept of mobility, why not embrace a comprehensive and coherent policy? We know one way forward is promoting free, safe and fair mobility in the Euro-Mediterranean region by increasing legal pathways to the EU. What about governance and human rights? Respect for human rights and the rule of law are actually presented as an integral part of the partnership. It is explicitly said that financing could be contingent on governance efforts, but we have seen to which extent the EU has not had the appetite to put conditionality in practice. Moreover, the text shows readiness to cooperate with all governments in the region, even if most of these are accused of repression and silencing civil society's voice and human rights, and have shown an increasingly assertive stance towards the population, of course, but also towards the rest of the region. Just look at Libya and the international society as a whole. I know this is a complex matter, but this should not mean we do not need to reflect on that. Additionally, there is much talk about resilient societies, and resilience, as we have seen, has become a critical term in EU vocabulary. But I have seen no mention of the need, even more urgent after the pandemic, to build accessible, universal, and robust social protection systems with a specific focus on the most marginalized people. The text does not point either to an overhaul of the way in which the EU engages civil society in its bilateral frameworks with southern Mediterranean countries. And we know how important civil society, particularly local actors, are for human resilience. Last but not least, the agenda represents a significant advancement in the EU's intent to contribute more to conflict resolution and peace building in the Mediterranean region. But it offers no transformational formulas whatsoever when it comes to addressing the most protracted and embedded conflicts in the region, namely the one in historic Palestine and the Western Saharan one. When the last review of the European neighbourhood policy was announced in 2015 and Charles spoke about it, our esteemed colleague Haida Mamira Fernandez spoke and has been speaking ever since, echoing a significant strand of the literature of old wine in new bottles. And this seems to represent a new instance of this adagio. A pretty ambitious text, and that has to be said, aimed at a renewed partnership, seems to preserve, however, most of the old agenda's insufficiencies. Above all, it keeps prioritizing security over meaningful reform, therefore upholding the status quo. The priorities outlined in the communication and the investment plan are to be concretized as the new Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, is programmed during 2021. This is why some of us believe there is still time, and hopefully also hope, to address the shortfalls and incoherencies of the text, and maybe contribute to devising an approach that genuinely takes into consideration the needs and aspirations of the societies across the southern Mediterranean. Her Excellency Minister González Laya meaningfully mentioned interdependence. Europe's credibility as a credible normative actor, as a global actor, as you said, but also its future, also the European Union's future, are at stake. I am looking forward to listening to my colleagues, as well as to engaging in a fruitful conversation, and I'm deeply thankful for the invitation.
Well, thank you, Itxaso. Thank you so much for those very interesting insights and for, I think, actually giving a very balanced account of this new agenda for the Mediterranean that's just been adopted back in February. We're all being very polite, I notice, and we're not talking about money. that shows that we've all been extremely well brought up. But of course, let me remind you that during the years 2014, 2020, the EU only earmarked 15 billion euros for all of our neighbourhoods, which is really quite a modest sum. And by the way, we're not talking much about the pandemic either, and I would perhaps encourage you to introduce this element. After all, if we could actually do something useful, if we could actually be helpful in, for example, in developing a proper vaccine campaign in partnership with some of our neighbours, I think this would speak volumes and perhaps show the populations of these countries that we're serious when we talk about solidarity and shared values and so on. So thank you, Itxaso, and hopefully we can come back to some of those issues. Please send your remarks, your questions. We have about 130 people following us right now to events@rielcano.org. That's rielcano.org. Thank you very much. So we now have, we move on to Sławomir. The microphone is yours. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you very much, Charles. And actually, I'm going to start my intervention with some thoughts on COVID-19 pandemic and how it influenced our relationship, it means the European Union, with our closest proximity with our neighbors. Minister Bogdan Aurescu said that what we, three of these countries, do have in common is that we do care about neighborhood. So I would like to take this line as a point of departure, and I'm going to say that this line is rather, it says about aspiration of us. Not necessarily it reflects the real situation on the ground and the real policy. One of the main factors which we should properly understand, is that the COVID-19 pandemic introduced a very clear division between being a member of the European Union and being a neighbor to the European Union. I would even say that pandemic has deepened EU neighborhood fatigue. Member states focus primarily on the internal troubles with the pandemic. Of course, it is hard to blame them for this. We should reflect how the EU policy could better meet the most pressing challenges in the Eastern Partnership region. The shortages of COVID-19 vaccines are the case in point. A slow vaccination process not only costs lives, but also generate the loss for economies. And also, that's, for me, it's very important. They generate bad sentiments about the European Union, because we have to bear in mind that a lot of people, a lot of societies around Europe share the aspiration to become one day a member of our community, because they know that it is a community based on values, it is a community based on solidarity, it is a community based on or driven by common action, joint action. And unfortunately, with this pandemic, we failed them in a way. The pandemic hit the poorest countries in our neighborhood, such as Armenia, Moldova, and Georgia, very much. They faced fall of the real GDP growth at the level of 6 to 8% in 2020. Yes, European Union has provided significant aid to Eastern Partnership countries to deal with the pandemic, both directly and through the COVAX, I mean, COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access Program, for those who are not familiar with these abbreviations. But vaccine deliveries are below the needs of partner countries. Through COVAX, the Eastern Partnership region has obtained so far around 350,000 vaccines. However, this is a very limited number. For instance, 70% of EU population received at least one dose of vaccine. Only 1% did in Ukraine. In this light, we need to consider sharing more broadly EU vaccine supplies with Eastern neighborhood, generally with our neighbors, not necessarily those only on the East. This could be done relatively quickly, as vaccination of priority groups in the EU is almost completed. Pragmatically, solidarity with our neighbors is our investment in our health and in the EU's long-term credibility in their eyes. Romania has set a very good example by sending doses to Moldova. The EU has already decided to use the first time its vaccine sharing mechanism in the Western Balkans. So there are precedents. What we need is to go further. I would even say here that now we are in the situation that either European Union would develop a robust vaccination program for its neighborhood, or in the sense would go out of the business. We would lose very important magnet. And we also should bear in mind that the EU does not step up its assistance. If the EU is not step up its assistance, China will use its vaccine diplomacy to increase its economic weight in the region. So far, Azerbaijan imported 800,000 doses from China, while Ukraine 200,000 doses. Russian and Chinese disinformation campaigns promote successfully the narrative that the EU has abandoned the region. The EU's lack of urgency in its vaccine diplomacy only feeds it. We should also look at the political crisis in the region exacerbated by the pandemic. The turbulences are many and they impact the stability of the region. We can name here a long list of conflicts which occurred recently. The war in Nagorno-Karabakh led to increased role of Russia and Turkey. In Armenia, defeat combined with the social-economic problems triggered the political crisis. Georgia, which has recently solved the political deadlock thanks to the EU mediation, is now surrounded by Russian troops. New security landscape may threaten its Euro-Atlantic ambitions. So the situation in Eastern Partnership countries located closer to EU border is also troublesome. In Moldova, reformist presidency of Maria Sadu is hampered by the parliament hostile to her. In Belarus, social problems catalyzed political protests against Lukashenko regime after rigged elections. Lukashenko rejected demands for new and fair elections and turned to Russia for help, which resulted in increased dependency of Belarus to Moscow. Overall, in the time of the pandemic, when the European Union focused on itself, our competitors in our closest neighborhood acted. They were not passive. In the sense, overall, they tried to undermine the European Union credibility as a actor which stabilizes its neighborhood and provides the strongest magnet for reforms and catching up with the EU. I think that my last point would be that in the context of Biden administration coming to the power and shaping its more active global policy, including promoting democratic standards, we should once again try to re-engage into discussion about enlargement of the EU, as the enlargement in the end is the most effective tools to stabilize the region, stabilize our neighborhood, and bring to the neighborhood the hope, the optimism generated by European Union integration. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think you've made some very, very valid points. The most important, perhaps, which we seem to take for granted, is that actions always speak louder than words. And as you were rightly saying, a lot of our people who live in the neighborhood, certainly in the eastern neighborhood, are singularly underwhelmed by the way in which we have treated them during the pandemic. My friends in Serbia, for example, tell me how negative the impact of all of this has been on the EU's image in Serbia, where, as you know, Serbia now has access not only to all of the Western vaccines, but also Sputnik, the Chinese vaccines, and so on. It's a veritable supermarket of vaccines in many ways. And you're absolutely right that we should stop being so inward-looking, serious, indeed tragic, though the pandemic has been, and regain some of our lost confidence, and in particular by talking about enlargement once again. So thank you very much for those points. Gheorghe, Magheru, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us again. It's a wonderful, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you again.
Thank you so much, Charles. Well, the honor is mine, and I'm glad to not only to be a virtual host of Elcano, but also to meet again Sławomir Dębski. We just had, by the way, another trilateral on think tank level on March of the foreign ministers with Poland, Turkey, and Romania, focusing on the Black Sea. Now we are completing the neighborhood plus for the neighborhood. Sławomir said a lot of things and your conclusions, which actually facilitate, in a way, my task, but it is not an easy one because, as was said, realities are hard to digest. Another difficult thing to digest is the chronophagous Balkans, and to digest them in 10 minutes is a physical impossibility. But I will try to put forward 3 ideas. One is Westernization, and this is related to the idea of enlargement, and I want to put it in a different perspective. The other one are the internal realities dealing with conditionalities, criteria, and commitments versus what Sławomir was mentioning on neighboring fatigue, but you also have enlargement fatigue. And the third one is how difficult it is to separate the internal realities from external factors, because precisely when you have the tide is ebbing, then external actors profit of this dynamic or lack of dynamic in order to reinforce their positions over there. I will start with the West. The basic idea I want to put forward is that the drive towards the European Union and enlargement, in this case of the Western Balkans, which is just a part of Southeast Europe, and we often forget the successive stages of enlargement of the European Union. This was a gradual project. Now, I found that in 1881, when the Kingdom of Romania and Spain established their diplomatic relations, a Romanian historian wrote the following thing about Romania. The only alternative to the adoption of the Western model of development is stagnation or retrogression. 1881. 1 century later, a Serbian anthropologist living in America, Trajan Stojanovic, read this remark, and he wrote that in the late 19th century, he said, the innovation of new values was accompanied by the diffusion of a new vocabulary. Look at criteria and standards and commitments. This is a long-term European process. And if I'm asked about the Western Balkans, I always say it's an unfinished business. And there is a Romanian author writing from 2 Europes to 1. Europe has to be completed. Now, in order to, we can't forget here what Fukuyama was saying in 2018. The contemporary European struggle over national identity begins with the founders of the European Union, Robert Schuman and Jean Monnet, who understood the exclusive ethnic definitions of national identity had been at the root of the 2 world wars that Europe experienced. Now, after the end of the Cold War, we had the unexpected, and there is an American author, John Connolly, writing on From Peoples to Nations, a history of Eastern Europe, that the violent breakdown of the former Yugoslavia after the end of the Cold War has changed the course of that region. Now, in the meantime, you have the Saloniki Agenda 2003 and so on, and you have, and I will get, and this European expose and NATO expose, it's very important. Because the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Mircea Joană, who is a Romanian, mentioned the relevance of NATO accession for EU accession. And that, I think, is equally valid for the current candidates to the European Union. And I will mention who are those. But equally important, I think, is the fact that Josep Borrell, in January this year, said the region, the West Balkans, has a future in the EU. But countries have to do their homework. Again, we are between the 2 waters, the 2 tides. I found out in the strategy, foreign affairs strategy of Spain for 2021, 2024, that it's exactly, I think, the position of Poland and Romania. Support for the Western Balkan accession perspective and support for Turkey's candidacy. Turkey is a special case. Because they are both historically in Southeast Europe, and at the same time they are a multi-player, geopolitical actor on several fields. Okay. Another thing, and I am returning to what Sławomir was saying, I think it's important to see the latest position of the State Department on the Balkans. But because here we are speaking of the relation between the European Union and the United States. The Balkan region has made tremendous progress, moving from war to peace, from disintegration to cooperative development, and implementing democratic, economic, and defense-related reforms on the path to Euro-Atlantic future. The United States remains committed to an integrated free and peaceful Europe. In this spirit, in March, current March, 9 ministers of foreign affairs, among which my minister, Bogdan Aurescu, drew a common letter to the High Representative in order to launch a strategic discussion on the West Balkans and put it not only from the perspective of enlargement, but also from a political perspective, taking into account the third actors which are playing now strongly in the ground and the necessary relaunching of the dialogue with the strategic partner. Now, on this background, it will be, I think, quite difficult to embark on a detailed presentation of the region, but I think some elements are necessary. First of all, what is the region? Because it is not only the West Balkans. You have to think that you have a region characterized by great political and economic diversity, a profound ethnic division, a worrying level of corruption and organized crime, to which one can add a latent state of historic insecurity, a lack of vision, cohesion, and regional coherence, all these in spite of a wide range of cooperation initiatives, resulting mainly after every conflict or regional cooperation crisis. It's not doom and gloom, but you have to take into account the realities in order to build on the positive acquis, because there is no perspective for a war in the Balkans now. If you look back 30 years, 20 years, or even 10 years back, it's tremendous the way carried on. And this is the spirit of my intervention. This is a long-term business, but it's European family affair. The other thing, we must not forget, in this sphere, Southeast Europe, we have 9 member countries, 9 NATO member countries: Albania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Greece, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Slovenia, and Turkey. We have 2 members of the Partnership for Peace, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Serbia. We have 5 members of the EU, Bulgaria, Croatia, Greece, Romania, and Slovenia. 2 Schengen members, Greece and Slovenia. 6 of the free trade agreement in Central Europe, in Central Western Europe, Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Kosovo, with the non-recognizing states, which we know so well, among which Romania and Spain, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. And to this, we can also add the criteria for accession to NATO, EU, or Schengen. Okay, this is to see the diversity of the region. And now, if time allows, 2 more points on the external actors. From the point of view of Russia, their goal is to create a strategic bridge in Southeast Europe on 2 pillars. One is the Black Sea, where they have concentrated their military might after the unlawful annexation of Crimea and the occupation of part of eastern Ukraine. And the other one is to have this tête de pont in the Western Balkans. From a military point of view, Russia has exploited the dependence of the Western Balkans on the traditional links inherited from Soviet era, military material, equipment, mentality, and so on. After the invasion, the annexation of Crimea, Russia has used the Balkans in order to deflect the attention from the Black Sea. But afterwards, they have increased, they have stepped up their actions in the West Balkans in order to slow down or even possibly prevent EU enlargement and NATO accession. And we know there have been examples of, well, interesting activities in some countries of the Western Balkans. I won't get in all the details. Now, it's a paradox. China has a different approach, whereas Russia aims to slow down or even prevent the enlargement of the European Union. From China's perspective, the enlargement of the European Union with the Western Balkans is an asset because it strengthens their hand in the economic penetration in the whole of the European Union. And now, I won't deal on Turkey, which is a kind of which we have this complex in and out relationship, and which is quite. I know your Secretary of State went to Ankara. We had the Trilateral meeting in Bucharest. Your minister was in the Western Balkans, so we have this dialogue, which we also started between Elcano and Dębski is going on. I just want to finish with the beginning on this long-term nation-building process to which, within the European framework to which Fukuyama was referring, it is the idea of getting from the perception of ethnic nation to the civic nation, which is part of the European project. of the European Union and NATO, because here you have also relations with neighbors, but also internal resilience. What we want to avoid in the Western Balkans is not to relapse into the negative resilience, which is how to resist change, because change is not coming as soon as possible from within and from without. Well, so this black and white tableau or picture I'm putting on your hand, I think should be an incentive for construction and dialogue. And by the way, we are strengthening on the think tank level our relations with the think tanks in the region, because this is very important. What we share among us, we also have to share with our neighbors in the region. Thank you very much, Charles.
Thank you for those very interesting thoughts, Gheorghe, and very, very interesting insights. I'm afraid we're running out of time, as you know, but I would like to ask you a sort of general question, which actually goes back to my original point about whether we should use the word neighbors, you know, in the plural or in the singular. In other words, neighborhoods, that is, in the plural or the singular. Do you detect in your respective countries a growing interest in your immediate neighborhood, or is this feeling that one of you mentioned, it's not just enlargement fatigue, it may also be neighborhood fatigue more generally? Obviously, we are becoming more inward-looking, or have become more inward-looking in recent months for, I think, probably rather justified reasons, in other words, the pandemic. But as the pandemic begins to, well, come under control, if that's not an overly optimistic way of putting it, as we begin to tame the pandemic, and as we begin to flex our muscles again as a global actor, do you see any evidence of a potential growing demand in our societies for our leaders to become more actively engaged in our immediate neighborhoods? Itxaso, can I start with you? And of course, you rightly pointed out the traditional tension between the securitization of the EU's agenda and other aspects of that agenda, which is probably a dilemma that we haven't really entirely resolved. But what's your feeling about this?
I don't believe Spain. You ask about our particular countries. I don't believe Spain has the luxury, can afford forgetting about the southern neighborhood. Even though there has been fatigue, and there has been fatigue for many years, is this idea that there's always conflict, there's always tension. If there are no wars, there's going to be a revolution, and there we go again. And it's a never-ending story. But Spain is very well aware of its neighborhood, and it's engaging again. And the minister has said so, and we have seen that with visits and with other kinds of actions. As I said, the pandemic and this idea of building or rebuilding partnership with the vaccines could be a great incentive for these countries or for these societies. This is why when it comes to the southern neighborhood, I need to differentiate between the societies and the countries. That's one of the uncomfortable truths. But these societies could be re-engaged, or could believe in the European Union and in Spain again with this idea of the vaccine. And this is why I put so much emphasis on this idea of helping these countries building social protection systems. I really believe this is something we could engage in, that it is not going to put at risk the regimes in and of themselves, and could help building this idea of inclusiveness and resilience that is sorely missed when it comes to these societies. And Spain, of course, I don't know anything, but I don't know that much about the eastern neighborhood. But I know Spain is pretty much engaged with this neighborhood as well, regardless of the distance. And this is one of the things that I'm pretty, I wouldn't say comfortable, but I wouldn't say proud when it comes to Spain, this willingness to engage with both neighborhoods, even though I believe that there are going to still be neighborhoods, not a whole neighborhood, because the enlargement difference is the basic difference between the East and the South. These countries, and these societies could never dream of becoming European Union members, and we all know that. The only offer was everything but institutions, with everything that comes with that, the insufficiencies and maybe the advantages for these countries in engaging with the rest of the continent or with the rest of the Middle East. But when it comes to Spain, hopefully Spain could influence and inspire the European Union. The engagement with the southern neighborhood and also with the eastern neighborhood is true, and it's a sign of hope. May I say?
Thank you very much, Itxaso. Sławomir, very briefly, over to you.
Very briefly, I tried not to mention during my initial intervention Russia. So now I would like to compensate this. And so I will say that as far as the Polish society or eastern flank societies, I would say that Russia make all of them interested in the immediate neighborhood, because Russia is very active and unfortunately is not a peaceful country. So that's the first point. Second, I expect that from the point of view of vaccination policy, which we should develop towards neighborhood, we have one and common neighborhood. Actually, you know, we need to develop this policy regardless, geographic direction. And second, that my last point, both China and Russia also see our neighborhood as one, because actually we promote our system, our values, and model development outside, regardless, geographic direction, and they don't like it, because our model of development is in sharp contradiction of theirs. So, and I stop here. So Russia and China unites our neighborhood again.
Excellent. That's a very good point. Thank you very much. Gheorghe.
Well, I will start from the grassroots, so to say. You cannot imagine what meant for Romania the moment when the European Union granted free circulation to the Romanian citizens. This is not only getting in touch with Western Europe and extraordinary access not only to trade but also to higher education. And you know very well about the Romanian communities in Spain or Italy, or France or Germany. Okay, but I'm not speaking about that. It is about our neighborhood. Romania has a very particular privilege to be both have the lengthiest border terrestrial with Ukraine, with the Republic of Moldova, with the Black Sea, just a couple of hundreds of kilometers from Crimea and neighboring the port city of Odessa, and on the other side we are all our southern neighborhood is it's a convention to call it the Balkans. In traditional geopolitics and German originating, it's Southeast Europe. Well, but it's a long story. It's a long story. Having all these neighborhoods, speaking about Romania's neighborhood, not of the European Union neighborhood, and the human contacts involved, you can imagine that there is another reality taking shape in day-to-day life, including shopping on one side and the other of the border, which is anarchy, including with Serbia, although Serbia is not yet the European Union member. Okay, this is one thing. The other thing is that at the level of the superstructure of the Romanian society, I think there is an increased acknowledgement of the fact that as part of what is called Stratcom, you need to enhance this neighborhood dimension, both eastward, and well, here we share the same language with, and not only language, heritage with the Republic of Moldova, but we also have very strong links with Ukraine. On the other side, we have Romanian communities south of the Danube. relations, century-old relations between Romanians and their neighbors in the South Balkans. So, but here we speak of something more, acknowledging, because Sławomir mentioned this vaccine diplomacy. This is very critical thing, because if there is a negative perception as to what the European Union is doing for these peoples, this is a gift into the hands of those who are using the vaccine diplomacy for other ends, and so on. So my perception is, from my level of awareness, is that there is awareness to increase this. This is why also at our think tank level, we try with our partners in the region to build up these common perceptions. Mm-hmm. And to return to the European Union, I think we already had this discussion, how to have 27 pairs of spectacles having a unique strategic vision. This is very important. This is very important. You won't have it, everybody has their own better perception of their immediate, how to have a better input from one side to the other, how to feel better the various pressures from one side to the other. So I think I will end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gheorghe. That's a wonderful reminder that we should give our EU slogan, United in Diversity, some real meaning, some real conceptual and intellectual meaning, and not just the other sort. So I'm afraid all good things must come to an end, and I just want to thank you all, Itxaso, Sławomir, Gheorghe, for those very, very interesting contributions. We've been followed by a maximum of about 150 people at one point. So let me thank all our listeners as well for tuning in. And this debate, of course, will also be made available online very shortly. So without further ado, good afternoon, stay safe, and I hope we can all meet in person in the not too distant future. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you.